This is the DRS train.
I've lost my voice. I'm joined by Nav F1 and Ace Shield, and you're listening to the DRS Train podcast. So amongst Singapore Grand Prix that we've had in recent years, maybe not the most interesting one. Second Singapore race in a row with no safety cars. One of only a handful of races we've ever had with no retirements either. Some small bits of tension off track though, because I suppose with the constructors resolved, maybe things will get kicked into gear a bit more with this title battle between Lando and Oscar. Also, Max is closing in very slowly, so we're being set up for something quite interesting, I feel.
Yeah, nice to be back on the podcast, Peter. 20th race ever without any retirements. I feel like it's starting to become a bit of a problem. Obviously, it's good for the manufacturers and the brands and the engineers, but it's not that good for the entertainment. And decent race, honestly, I know that a lot of people didn't like it, but there were quite a lot. There was quite a lot going on in the midfield, and yeah, it was a bit disappointing at the front.
I think they didn't like it because the TV direction didn't really follow the race well enough. There were lots of stuff happening once the pit stop kicked off, and then the race direction was following Norris and Verstappen, then Antonelli and Leclerc when they were not making moves. They were then following other drivers. They were not following where the action were.
This has been an issue for a while now. I mean, a mixture of the TV direction, but also the way the races go. That in a lot of the time we see very little happening at the front, and all the interesting battles are happening at the midfield, but not for points positions. And this again was a perfect example because there was very little movement going on at the front, but we spent the entire race focusing on Max and the McLarens. And there was so much stuff, particularly right at the very end. There was a lot going on that they just ignored completely. But I suppose one driver and one team that we saw very little of was the race-winning team, which was Mercedes. George had quite an interesting weekend. I mean, he crashed in practice. He said he was feeling under the weather, but then he managed to get this pole position. And he kind of commanded the race from the front very comfortably. A bit of redemption for crashing in the last lap in 2023. That's his 5th career win, I think now. And one of his more impressive ones. And then Antonelli as well. He qualified well. He lost a place at the start, and then eventually got it back and was battling with the Ferraris. So overall, one of Mercedes' better weekends this year.
Yeah, I hope the fans are gonna like your ASMR voice because I am. And yeah, the TV production, this race, just to finish on this, I generally think it was a new low for the sport because I don't think I've seen it this bad where you generally would see the gaps on the TV and just fans. I feel like a lot of fans would have been able to do a better job than this professional team that they have doing the broadcasting. So yeah, that was really disappointing. And yeah, Mercedes, Russell, I genuinely think that Russell had one of the best quali laps in recent history, at least for him, but just in general, because to get pole by 4/10 over anyone else, 2/10 over Max, and also to do that lap twice in a row was really impressive because no one else managed to do that. Most drivers went slower, at least by a 10th, and George somehow went 7,000 faster while staying very consistent. So yeah, it was a weird one because it wasn't something we had really seen coming, right, Ace?
Yeah, after free practice on Friday, there were lots of pessimism for Mercedes. And I thought it was kind of unwarranted because in free practice one, Mercedes didn't really focus on quali laps, and then in free practice two, George crashed before he could start his soft runs, so we didn't see the George speed. And then when Antonelli went out on the soft to do a quali lap, he had to bail it on the last sector due to the red flag from Lawson. So we saw neither driver really making the lap. And so after Friday, I saw lots of pessimism in the media about Mercedes. And I thought it was unwarranted because those first two sectors Antonelli was doing, they were on the same lap time as Alonso. And Alonso himself, he did a lap time that was a tenth slower than actually Piastri and close to Verstappen. So you could see that Mercedes was actually already on the pace. The surprising thing was on Saturday they did a further step that neither McLaren nor Red Bull nor Ferrari were able to achieve. It was insane that quali lap from Russell. It was insane that he repeated it twice because he improved by 7 milliseconds. So I really did not see that coming.
I suppose it was just kind of a surprising weekend in general because they have. I mean, this was George's second win this year, but most races they have been kind of third or fourth fastest, and this time, especially as Max started the race on softs and George started on mediums, and George still was able to build out a lead in the race. I mean, in general, he's had probably his best season ever, and has kind of gone under the radar because at the moment, the two main candidates for driver of the season are him and Max, because he's finished outside the points once, and that was Monaco, which was a bit of a joke of a race, and it's just been just really, really consistent and just constantly delivering, whereas Antonelli has been a bit erratic. I mean, he's scored points in the last 3 races, so he's starting to get back into a rhythm now, but there was a lot of the mid-season wasn't so good, but then he himself had a good race as well, and so Mercedes are starting to settle down now, and I think they're still, I think they are currently second in the constructors, and they're still, even though it's quite close, there's only 35 points between them and Ferrari and Red Bull. I think they're still more than likely going to take that.
So, just to use this as an occasion to kind of open up the floor a bit, would you say George is the second best driver in Formula One right now?
He could be.
Look, it's hard to say because when 6/10, 3/5 of the grid, when there is 12 drivers out of 20 that really are not in a car good enough to really understand where they are, it's not that Russell is a top 3, top 2 of the grid. You start to say that among the top 4 teams, how good Russell is. And then I can say easily, he's been the second best driver out of those 4 teams. But then if you go down the grid in the midfield, you have Gasly, you have Hajar. God damn it, Hajar is doing an incredible season. You have Alonso, you have another one who's doing well. Hülkenberg, not anymore. I could say Bortoleto, maybe. There's all these drivers that... Albon, yes, Albon. How could I forget Albon?
Yeah. Okay.
You start to see these drivers, their season that they're having. Where do you put Albon? Albon, what he's been doing this year, if you say he's the second best driver of the grid, how can you argue against that? He's not fighting the Verstappens, he's not fighting the Norris and Piastris, he's fighting Sainz, who screwed up half of the races at Williams he's had. He's fighting Alonso and Stroll, who are on an Aston Martin that is nowhere half of the time. And Alonso himself is
fighting Antonelli
crappy races somehow. At times.
He's fighting Antonelli as well somehow.
He's fighting rookies, Hajar, Bortoleto, Berman, Colapinto, they're rookies. So it's hard to say he's P2, but at the same time, he has 70 points, which is basically double the next midfield guy. How do you rate these guys? That's the point. It's hard to say. I think that if we just talk about the top four teams, Russell clearly second best.
Okay, well, we talked about Russell, but Antonelli, he had a decent weekend after, as Peter said, the shaky mid-season patch. He's been better recently. And the thing is, yes, he was good. He had this great overtake on Leclerc, very, very um, opportunistic into that corner. Leclerc completely left it open for him. Didn't expect that move. But should we be seeing this weekend as a good one for Antonelli because he got a good P5, had a decent weekend, or should we also be judging the fact that he was still quite far from George, all things considered, Ace?
Look, I like to compare this weekend with Canada back in June. Back in June at Canada, he was okay. In free practice, he was always lagging behind Russell, but slowly was closing up the gap, with experience, with learning from Russell. He was getting close, and then in quali, Russell pole position, but Antonelli in fourth was not far away, really. And then in the race was able to make the overtake at the start, and then it was basically fighting with Verstappen, who himself was fighting with Russell the entire race. So there was not much difference, but you could see that the entire weekend it was Antonelli chasing Russell. Russell was the pace setter of the team. And I think Singapore was kind of the opposite. A less clean weekend, but it started with Antonelli being the pace setter. Antonelli was already fast immediately, both FP1 and FP2, and George crashed. Even in FP3, even during qualifying, you see Antonelli was very close to Russell all throughout the weekend, and only in Q3, and he says because he asked too much of the car both laps, and I believe him. Only in Q3 when he pushed too much, the car started going sideways, so you're 3 times slower than Russell, and just like Canada, your teammate is P1 and you are P4. So
And
I
well,
see
Peter,
this
what do you think
difference that
about?
unlike
Sorry,
Canada, I
go
see
on, go
this
on.
difference that unlike Canada, it was a more scrappy weekend, but he was already on the pace, he was not chasing Russell. So, how to evaluate this weekend? I'd say he has to make a better weekend. He has to nail quali, he has to try to get a better start because he lost 2 positions at the start, and that was it for the race. He made he made the overtake on Leclerc was nothing. It's not really that. We'll talk about it more with the Ferrari section, but Ferrari had massive brake problems. They were lift costing everywhere. Antonelli got the idea and found him napping enough.
And Peter, what did you think?
I mean, Canada is clearly his best race this season, but Singapore is a circuit he's never raced at. And for some reason, in the past couple of years, it's suddenly become intensely physical. Because, of course, this year they made a big thing about how all the drivers had to wear these like cooling vest things. And I was like, go back 3 or 4 years, there was never, it never seemed like they made a thing of it being abnormally more difficult than a lot of the other races in the tropics or whatever. But so there's that side of it, and as well. But he did also get lucky, I suppose, that both Ferraris were having problems near the end. But it was not. There wasn't anything bad. I mean, obviously he lost a place at the start to Leclerc, but he got it back again, so he drove fine. But yeah, there was a bit of a gap, I suppose, to George.
That's true, yeah. But yeah, as we said, Mercedes are second in the standings. Russell is doing an incredible job. Let's move to Verstappen, Red Bull.
Hmm.
Yeah, they did. They had a very Red Bull race in that Tsunoda was stuck at the bottom. He made Q2, well done to him. But yeah, Verstappen was fighting Russell for pole. It seemed before coming into quali, it didn't seem like that would be the case just because usually the Red Bull it has historically struggled there, and Verstappen also hasn't had the best of results there, even though it hasn't always been because of his fault. But yeah, he finally had a good weekend in Singapore, P2 in quali, P2 in the race, and he genuinely defended quite well on Lando, I think, because I feel like in this race, Lando, we'll talk about it later, but Lando did what he had to do to put pressure on Max in the latter third of the race. So I genuinely think it was Max doing a good job at holding him off at the start. But yeah, what do you make of Max and his title prospects? And was this a good race for his title prospects or a missed opportunity because 7 points were given to Russell instead, Ace?
I mean, if you listen to Verstappen, he was stolen the win by Norris, impeding him in qualifying. I don't know if either you watched the lap, the mistake. Yeah, I don't think that it was Norris' fault, it was Verstappen that he knew that if he couldn't nail that corner the way he wanted, and he was not gonna because there was a bit of dirty air from Norris, then he was not gonna get the pole position. So he took the risk and
Also,
it
I
didn't
don't
pay off.
think it was a mistake that cost 2 tenths. What do you think? I don't feel like there were 2 tenths in it.
He missed the apex at the inside of turn 16. And so that automatically puts you in the wrong place for turn 17. You have to be much tighter, and therefore you cannot go on the gas as soon as you want. Otherwise, you do the same mistake that Lawson did in free practice. So, he missed the apex, that was it. He didn't even try to finish the lap because it was not going to be a pole position lap. And he was mighty angry with Norris. And I don't think it was Norris' fault at all. Okay, it was Norris' fault, but he did nothing illegal. He was going to be somewhere on the track. He was smart enough to be in the best place to disrupt Verstappen and disrupting in a way that is perfectly legal because drivers are not faulted for the slipstream they generate.
Do you think that was on purpose,
Norris
though?
was smart. Norris did a very smart move. People don't give him credit for this, but it was mighty intelligent to be there at that moment because Verstappen otherwise was fighting with Russell for real, and it
Interesting you
didn't
say
work
that. I
out.
haven't seen anyone else. I haven't seen anyone else say that it might have been on purpose, but it could have been.
I mean, people have been trying to analyze this
No.
online and see if it was, and yeah.
Verstappen says it was on purpose by Norris.
Yeah.
So Verstappen agrees with me.
I mean, some people have been saying, well, it would have looked clever if it was done early on in the season as kind of mind games, and then other people are saying, well, Lando isn't intelligent enough to think up something like this or whatever. But like, I mean, I'm looking at it, and I don't think he really did impede him. I mean, he was very far ahead, and this is a circuit that has quite a low average speed, so you don't get the same effect of wakes and turbulent air and all of that. It's really very much a mechanical grip circuit as opposed to aero. And yeah, he went ever so slightly wide, but not that much. And if he had got pole, based on George's pace, I don't necessarily think he would have kept him behind anyway. So it's because that's the other thing with Max is the entire race. And he does this a lot. He was complaining about gear shifts and brake balance, and he almost crashed a few times. I mean, this was always going to be. I knew that this weekend for him and Red Bull was always going to be one of damage limitation because it has always been one of their weakest circuits. This and Sochi are the only circuits that Max has raced at and not won as well. So from that perspective, yeah, it was a success because he beat both McLarens with Lando ahead of Oscar, which is what he needs. But it's not. When you look at the points gap, he needs to be beating both of them by at least 10 points in every race.
Yeah, now it's
So
10, I think. It was 9
yeah,
before,
and
so yeah.
yeah, and so it needs basically he needs to win every remaining race and have both of them third or lower, which doesn't sound that realistic at the moment. It needs them to crash or something else to go wrong, and for him, everything to go right. And with this, it was so like I was waiting for a mechanical failure of him to hit the wall. It's like, okay, now title battle's over, but he just about held on.
There's the other circuits he didn't win at during his career. The 2020 freak circuits.
Oh,
He
those
didn't
don't
win at
count. They're
Turkey.
just yeah. Oh
Okay,
yeah.
they don't count.
Well, yeah, they're just not.
Okay.
Well, as you know, he did. No, they did. Oh, yeah, he never won at Turkey because they did that again. Mugello doesn't count because that was a one-off. Nürburgring
There
was a
is
one-off. That doesn't
Portimao,
count.
2 races.
Portimao, but whatever. Yeah. Those aren't like they've been around for like if they've been like 2 races there, and during when Mercedes had a rocket ship, it's like, well, can you blame him? But yeah,
Yes.
there's a couple.
Ins-
Yeah, but well,
Instead,
he's
what about? Okay, carry on.
yeah,
Sorry,
yeah. Well,
bro.
I was gonna say he's won at a hell of a lot more circuits than Tsunoda has. That was another very frustrating performance from him. Yeah, because he made Q2, but then he somehow lost 4 places at the start when he was on softs, and the whole point of doing softs is that you get a good start and keep position. And then yeah, he got lapped and he got beaten by the B team with a broken engine, and it's just now it really is getting annoying. Also because seeing that like because of Max, they're 35 points away from being second in the constructors, and and when they should already be comfortably second, and now it's like Azerbaijan was good, but now he's just reverted back to his normal programming.
I will say one thing and one thing on defense of Tsunoda. He lost out to Hajar, who pulled off one of the smartest move I've ever seen a rookie do. Okay, Hajar did something mighty impressive, and we will talk about it later on when it's his turn. But Tsunoda lost out. It's not really that shameful.
Well, I mean,
Well,
if it had
it
to
is
have a broken,
shameful that that firstly, and also he's 19th, and no, he's 17th now. To be fair, no, after Azerbaijan, he's 17th. But yeah, he's 17th of the 19 full-time drivers. Then again, it says a lot on the drivers when Behrman is last with 20 points. So the level has gone up and people are delivering more, but still, that 3rd to 17th sandwich is a bit too much. And I'm someone who follows Aston Martin, and I'm used to those big sandwiches, and it's not a normal thing. Do you think Tsunoda um is for sure going to Aston Martin then, or do you think there's anything else for him?
I haven't heard discussions about Aston Martin in ages because a lot of people were just making that assumption because they're taking on Honda power. But as it is, they're not like Stroll's going to be there forever, and Alonso doesn't want to retire yet. So if he does go, he's going to have to wait until at least 2027. But otherwise, it's just I think a lot of the assumptions are that he'll just get swapped with Hajar and put back down in the we got fucked by Max Verstappen club with Liam Lawson.
Yes, I do believe that Tsunoda doesn't have a future in Formula One unless, like 2026, Aston Martin is a complete flop, so much a flop that Alonso doesn't chooses to not continue anymore, just gives up, and no other top team that ever wants to go there. And so yes, they would give the seat to Tsunoda for 2027, but it's an apocalyptic scenario for Aston Martin if that happens. For that to
It's
happen.
kind of insane that even if Stroll wants to leave, he's not allowed to, which we have all accepted. He's just going to be forced to do it. So, yeah, going down the order, we now have the big boys, which really isn't a good term to describe them, but Constructors World Champion McLaren for the 2nd year running. Is it the 9th time ever? I think I saw 9th, 10th.
I feel like it must be more than 9, but then I think even Ferrari only has 14 or 15 constructors titles, so
No,
maybe it
no, I
is 9.
have the number.
I think
It's
it's just they haven't done it in forever because it was these before these 2 years. It was 1998 was the last time.
oh, it's the 10th. Yeah, well,
10th.
I feel like
Okay.
they should have they should have had a bigger deal
Yeah,
out of it.
couple in the 70s, then all the McLaren Honda ones. Yeah.
Yeah, 1974, 84, 85, 88, 9, 90, 91, 98, 24, 25.
Yeah. Okay.
And yeah, must be said that in 2010 and 2012 they really 2012 they really should have won, but
Yeah.
anyway. Norris and Piastri, the drama continues. Zach Brown and Andrea Stella are still not really managing the situation very well. Even at the end of the race, I'm sure you guys saw the podium celebrations. It was very awkward because Oscar was just like not there and kind of standing there. Then they took a group picture, and in the group picture, it's like it's a very corporate picture of, oh, I love my colleagues and I love my managers and I love my boss. And it was both Oscar and Lando smiling, and it's getting very eerie. Eerie is the word I feel, where you know that there's a big issue, and you know that those two drivers probably deep down are starting to have an issue with each other. They're never going to show it because McLaren doesn't want them to show it, and the fans even less. The McLaren fans even less want them to show it. I think they would explode if Lando and Oscar started insulting each other. But yeah, it's just being very mismanaged, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's finally getting interesting, to be honest, because it shouldn't shock anyone that the two of them are starting to not really get on when they're fighting for a title in the same team. Also, because they have this impending threat of Verstappen coming from behind and taking it from both of them.
They're
But
fighting each
it's
other
just
for a first title.
sorry.
First title is always. They're fighting each other for their first title, which
I know, yeah,
also
that's it
plays.
as well. So there's always that there of tension because for Lando, he probably feels like he really should have it because it's becoming increasingly obvious that he's the number one driver according to the team, and because he's been around for such a long time. Whereas this is only, I mean, for Piastri, if he does take the title, he's done that in his third season, which has only happened a few times before from anybody. But yeah, Oscar, it's becoming interesting. He's slowly completing his transition into Alain Prost, and it's definitely feeling victimized, I think, because the way that the McLaren rules work, I guess he's sort of thinking, well, I'm playing by the rules and getting screwed over by it because they're being so soft and easy on Lando. Because at the beginning, like because I'm back in my Verstappen shagger phase for the rest of the season. It pains me how close we got to Lando putting both of them in the wall at the start and just blowing the championship ride open. And I think Oscar was like, when you look at the onboards, and it's like Orlando is just like, yeah, get out of the way, please, and knocks him, almost puts him in the wall. You can see that a lot that Oscar would be like, yeah, what the fuck was that? Even though for the rest of the race he didn't have any pace until at the very end when he was closing up because Lando couldn't get past Max. But at the end of the race, yeah, he didn't. So he didn't turn up for the podium ceremony. Some people say it's because he was still doing his media duties or whatever. He cut off Zach Brown when he was congratulating him over the radio. He just pulled
Yeah.
the steering wheel out. And then when they did their post-race debrief and they're holding the billboard thing, and he didn't speak, and he looks like he's being held hostage and whatnot. He just doesn't. Maybe it's his own self because he had obviously a really rotten weekend in Baku, and up until then was really commanding the season, and now everything is just starting to collapse around him. That he's getting annoyed because of that, but yeah, that there is a degree of favoritism towards Lando within the team.
Do you think he was a bit too rattled for how he should, for what his attitude should be at this stage of the competition, though? Like after the very obvious issue, do you not think? Because I'm thinking a bit like Ciaron would at this point, that he should have just put his head down and not make it be so much of an issue publicly on the radio. Well, there's also the point of is the radio public, but publicly on the team radio and try to catch up to Lando.
I don't know. I mean, he's getting maybe it's that lack of experience. He's getting rattled because up until this point, he's been known for just being kind of stone cold and emotionless and everything. It's yeah, because even with the way it's gone recently, he still has a lead of, isn't it 24, 25 points or whatever?
22.
22, so
22.
almost a race win. That's a controllable lead. He can afford to give Lando a win or two and still keep the lead with 6 races to go. It's not necessarily the most comfortable lead in the world.
If Oscar
But
gets one more win, then it would really, really help him. I think the issue would be if he does not win, because yeah, the win giving you 7 points, I think that sometimes people forget that previously when it was 10-8-6, 2 points wasn't that much because you finished first, second, or third. There are just 2 points between you and the
yeah,
driver in front. 7 points is a lot compared to the 3 points between second and third. So he really needs to get that win somewhere. And it with Max and seemingly Lando kind of having the edge over weekends recently. Yeah, he really needs to get that somewhere.
he is complaining a lot as well because in qualifying he was ranting because they threw yellow flags because somebody was slowing down or something and that ruined his lap or whatever. And he normally just doesn't say anything. So yeah, he had been just complaining a lot. But if he won the next race, for example, that gives him a lead of at least 29 points. With 5 races left, he can afford to give away about 5 or 6 points per weekend and still win it. Which is
That's the issue. If Lando wins, because we've been seeing races recently where Lando hasn't been winning and has just been like chipping off 4 or 5 points at Oscar, and it could be more. But if Lando wins, it's 15 points, and it suddenly becomes very, very problematic.
Yeah. At that point, it's like, well, the title's on, and you just look at it, you think it shouldn't be on. That's the thing, because it kind of amazed me how close things were. I get that, it went wrong at Australia. He lost a lot of points there, but elsewhere, like, considering that Lando crashed into him in Canada and he didn't finish, I was like, how was it still this close? And early in the season, when Oscar had that run of three wins in a row, it shouldn't be this difficult to be beating Lando like this. And this is another reason everyone's wanting to see Max do it, because it's like, well, Max is the only one that really deserves it, because these two are making it so difficult. I mean, yeah, they've cruised to the constructors title, but again, that's only because Tsunoda is underperforming so much that they've been able to win it so early. Not that they were ever going to lose it, but they're just not really delivering in the way they should, and the team is just becoming annoying because they're sort of they've sort of emboldened this army of snowflakes called their fans, who can't take the slightest bit of confrontation or difficulty. And we have this, okay, well, you crashed, so to be fair, now your teammate has to crash as well, and whatnot. It's just like, you can't balance things out. But now that the constructors is sorted, I'm hoping that they might just, like, the gloves are off. We don't care. If you want to crash into each other, it doesn't matter. Just do whatever you want, and let's see who wins in the end.
A lot of people have been saying that maybe McLaren just wanted to get the championship done, and now it's up to the drivers to see what they do. Last thing is Lando. Would you not say this was, well, we always kind of criticize him a lot on here, but would you not say this weekend was quite good in that we saw a more incisive Lando at the start, one who was a bit more ruthless with the tires and pit stops decisions, because he actually pitted instead of just bending over to whatever was told to him. I feel like some credit should go towards him in this weekend. This weekend.
Yeah, I mean, he had a very good race for himself. To had a very good start, and yeah, he was even though he couldn't pass him, he was pressuring Max the whole time. Whereas Piastri was very kind of absent in that area. Dr. No, what do you think?
I've been thinking just how intriguing the way things played out at McLaren was, because Piastri was slow in the race. I think we can all agree on that. But that had a knock-on effect also on Norris. Because, okay, Norris did a very risky but also massively rewarding move at the start on Piastri. Piastri took it very badly and was slow for the entire race, but then they were doing the overcut on Verstappen to get a better tire to the end and attempt further overtakes. And they told Norris, do you want to pit after Piastri? We're gonna have to pit him because he's under threat of undercut from Leclerc. And Piastri himself had said, I don't want to lose position to Leclerc, the track position. So this all had a knock-on effect. Piastri was fairly slow, so he was under threat from the Ferraris. Being under threat from the Ferraris meant he had to pit, I guess, sooner than McLaren would have wished to. But pitting Piastri meant having to pit Norris, because Norris being ahead has the precedence on pitting. And so they asked Norris, and Norris said, I prefer keeping position on Piastri than having an even better tire to try and attack Verstappen. So you see, this attempt to check Piastri, to not get undercut by Piastri, meant he had to give up trying to overtake Verstappen. So you see, if and Piastri had to be pitted early because he was being slow. So you see, Oscar being slow meant Norris couldn't make the overtake on Verstappen. It's kind of intriguing, isn't it? This dynamic.
Is your cat a Lando or an Oscar fan?
It's a Garfield fan.
But and I suppose another thing actually with Lando is that he did that collision at the start, but then he was carrying damage the entire race. And it
Yes,
seems
but
if you're not Kevin Magnussen, you won't get called into the pits to fix it. And he managed to carry on. I think maybe helped by the fact that it was on the right hand. It was the right hand end plate, and this is a circuit which is mostly. No, wait. The circuit's counterclockwise, so it's mostly right hand turns. So it should have affected him more, but yeah. Or was it the left? It was either way. It was the side which wasn't affected as much. Again, it's not much of an aero circuit, but even with that, he was able to keep the pace up when it could have broken off very easily. Yeah, I guess we'll just have to see what happens with them in the future.
Yeah. There was a lot of talk on how K-Mag got black and orange flags for those issues, and McLaren didn't. So, yeah, hopefully now the gloves are off and they actually fight each other a bit more directly, because that would be nice. Going down the order, we now have the marvel that is the Ferrari Formula One team, and yet another. Well, no, not another P6, P7, because Mr. Lewis lost his P7. Yeah, it was again finishes at P6 and P7 though, which has really become a trend for them. And yeah, there were a lot of fundamental issues at this race. As Ace mentioned a bit earlier, a lot of LICO, as Leclerc said, lift and coast. And he was there was a quote he said, I'm doing 200 meters, no, 20 seconds of lift and coast per lap, or was it 200 meters? He said something with two, but yeah, he just said he was always lift and coasting and it was undrivable. So yeah, Lewis, they put him on softs at the end to try and catch Antonelli, and he just caught brake issues, and he lost P8 to his old rival. So yeah, Ferrari, it's not going to improve because they said they're not bringing any upgrades until the end of the season. Is it just a case of damage limitation now and trying to not make the tifosi themselves?
Well, they managed to survive both home races reasonably well, so that's something. But with Lewis, there is a recurring theme in a lot of races this year where basically he's running in P7 as the slowest of the front runners, and it should be P8, but Tsunoda is useless, so it's P7. But what ends up is that he gets this gigantic gap behind him that allows him to take a cheap pit stop, which he did this time.
Instead the
And
fastest
again,
lap.
sorry.
He steals the fastest lap every time, and he gets a
Yeah,
lap
and
record.
even though it doesn't like you don't get points for it, it's just like, well, why not? Because again, this is another race where there is, because of past races, there is the looming threat of a safety car all the time, and that's why some other teams later on ran very long stints hoping for a safety car. And so this time it worked because obviously his pace. I mean, they said he might catch Antonelli by the last lap, and then he caught him about 6 or 7 laps before the end. And I was thinking he must have been gaining nearly 3 seconds a lap on him. And that I was like, that's quite significant pace. And then obviously maybe he pushed it too hard because the brakes went at the very end. Of course, something else, we didn't get to see any of this because what we were seeing was basically a replica of Silverstone 2020, like sparking brakes. He lost the penultimate lap. I think he lost about 30 seconds. He lost 18 seconds. He was quite a bit faster on the final lap, but then it turns out he was cutting corners everywhere and still beat Nando. And yeah, that was just a bizarre. He got the penalty in the end because the way he was cutting corners was kind of ridiculous. And Leclerc's race was fairly nondescript, I suppose, but just the same kind of damage limitation. But there's not much else going on with them.
Let me narrate for you exactly the last stint of Hamilton's race. So he was nowhere, as you said, he pitted for soft tires because why not? And Leclerc was going actually very slow. And this is going to be also the motive of the rest of the midfielders, that doing a second stop or going to on the soft tires to the end was possible because there were slower cars in front. Sorry, he got grumpy. He was gonna bite me. It's gonna be the motive also in the midfield battle that there is a slow car in front that is really hampering the rhythm of another car, and so actually pitting for soft tire or a second time becomes worth it. And Hamilton pitted on the soft tire, set fastest lap. He was 2.5 seconds faster than Leclerc and Antonelli. He was catching them mighty fast. 2.5 seconds per lap. It means in 8 laps you back where you started, but with much newer tires. And so, yes, the critical point of the race was the fact Antonelli managed to overtake Leclerc on lap 53, 54. And just before Hamilton got there, it meant that Antonelli was in free air, finally could unleash his pace, and Antonelli's pace compared to Hamilton was only, less than a second worse than Hamilton. And so, team orders, Leclerc lets Hamilton through, and then Hamilton continues to chase down Antonelli because he gets close, but doesn't have the delta to really pull off the overtake, and he's really pushing. And he commented after the race that he knew the brakes were hot, they had the problem at Ferrari, but he did not get any notification that the brakes had reached the maximum temperature. So he braked hard one time, and sparks came out of the brakes. And the problem started. The engineer told him cool down the brakes. This is 4 laps from the end. He tries to cool down the brakes again, gets to turn 13, and bam, again, sparks from the brakes. And this is serious this time because he has to really slow down. He was lapping in the 136. The fourth to last lap was a 149, and then the next lap, the third to last, was a 140 lap time. So he's lost 8 seconds. And then he's in that weird spot, where he's falling away from Antonelli, and then Leclerc is catching him back up. But just right behind Leclerc, there's a quartet of cars, Bortoleto. Oh God, I don't remember them by heart. It's gotta be Bortoleto, Gasly, Colapinto, Hülkenberg, but not in this order. So anyway, there's these 4 cars, and Hamilton has the presence of mind of thinking, if I had this massive brakes problem and I have to lift and cost a massive amount, it means if I don't get out of the way, they might crash into me. And so on the penultimate lap, he has to let Leclerc and these 4 cars through and then really cool down the brakes. And so the penultimate lap is a 2 minutes and 8 second lap. Alonso, the last lap, is like 12 seconds behind Hamilton. But then Hamilton, he had cooled down the brakes enough, I guess. And then he could start to push a little bit more on the last lap. And he had this very nice way to control the gap from Alonso, because he managed to get to the last sector 2.5 seconds in front of Alonso. And was still doing massive lift and cost. But it meant that, he gets to turn 14. Alonso gets close 1.5 seconds after the last DRS section. And after the last turn 16, 17, Alonso finally is there under a second. But, that's the last turn. He's not going to brake for turn 18 and 19, and then there's the checkered flag. So, Hamilton had this mighty way of just managing the massive 50 seconds gap across those 3 laps to not lose position to Alonso and to not create any danger whatsoever. Because truly, Hamilton was not a danger on track. I'll admit this. He had no brakes, but the way he handled things, he posed no danger to anybody. And the catch was when he had brake issues, he went off 4 times, which is one too many times, and he got the penalty. And he did lose position to Alonso, but crucially did not lose position to Berman. So, all in all, he still saved 2 points from what could have been a possible last lap retirement. So, I
Well,
think
5
Hamilton
seconds,
handled it mighty well.
5 seconds, I feel, was very generous because he saved much more than 5 seconds there. And if he hadn't cut those corners, he could have easily finished P10 or P11. Like yeah, that was a weird one. It doesn't really matter, I guess, because it's for P8. But firstly, if that had happened on lap 30, for example, that could black flag you. They didn't do anything because it was the last 2 laps, and yeah, you can try and make the end. I think even if his final lap, the state of his brakes on the final lap were like 2 or 3 laps from the end, they could have black flagged him. And secondly, the amount he cut was much more than worthy of 5 seconds. So yeah, doesn't really matter. Yes, Ace?
He cut 4 corners in total. It was he cut turn 2 one time. He cut turn 50, 16, 17, which is what could be seen from the replays. And then he cut a further corner. Crucially, all these track limits were on the third to last lap, so on lap 60, and then a further one on lap 61, which I guess was the turn to corner cut. And so you see, he had this period of when the brake just gave up, or just adapting, where he went off a few times. But then the rest of lap 61 and the last lap, he did it entirely within track limits. So, I understand why the 5 seconds penalty is fair, because if there was a wall right there on the limit of the track, he would have made a mistake by going off those few times, and he would have retired. So he has to be punished for that. But it's 4 track
I guess.
limits. He did not gain 12 seconds. He gained maybe 2 seconds, which makes sense giving him a 5 second penalty. So he falls back behind Alonso. Alonso would have done the overtake if Hamilton didn't cut those corners those 4 times. But it doesn't justify a bigger penalty to put him behind Berman. Berman still finished 12 seconds away from Hamilton. It was not the corner cutting that saved him the position from Berman.
Yeah, true. Well, I guess that did happen, but yeah, I think that's also a good way to move on to Aston Martin. Alonso started the weekend really well, but was it seemed full of prospects, and he finished first in FP1, fourth in FP2. Usually FP1, fair enough, no one really cares. FP2 is when it really becomes serious, especially because it's similar to the conditions in the race. But then Aston Martin did an Aston Martin. They tried to improve the setup and obviously completely downgraded the car. At some point, we need to start having conspiracies about this because why do they keep doing this? Alonso didn't even want to try to do this, but the team still thought they were doing a good thing and then completely messed up as usual. In quali, Alonso was convinced he would go out in Q3. He was convinced both Astons would be out in Q3, and he was like really surprised that they made in Q1. Sorry. He was convinced both cars would go out in Q1, and he was really happy with the Q3. So P7 in the end was about as good as he could have gotten all weekend, but very convoluted way to reach that. And yeah, driver of the day, which he never gets usually. And that was surprising.
Look, I have a different view of what happened at Aston Martin. They always focus very much on qualifying. They always run low fuels and other stuff, much more aggressive in free practice already than most other teams. So naturally, they look very good already on Friday. And then, they have to reel this back. They start aggressive and you go over some limits, and so you have to cut and get back the car to a car that would work, that is legal car. And so what happened was that Singapore, they did not get to do long runs on Friday. because of the many red flags. Only Mercedes did long runs on Friday. And so everybody started to focus heavily on long runs already in free practice 3 on Saturday. And so naturally, everybody starts to reel back the car back to a more race window, because otherwise they just have nothing to do. And I think that's what happened with Aston Martin. They lost the competitiveness they had in qualifying, but gained massively in the race. Alonso was mighty fast. He spent 15 laps as head of the midfield, and then unleashed the pace to open up a gap, and then pit safely. He extended to lap 28 before pitting. That's the same lap Piastri pitted on. So he pitted after Norris, after Verstappen, after Leclerc, Russell, Antonelli. He pitted after many, many drivers. And then he had the slow stop, fell back behind Berman and Ajar, and all the other guys didn't stop. And he still managed to make all those overtakes, And some of it is the fact he was on the soft medium strat, which was mighty fast yesterday. And some of it was the car was mighty fast on race day. The comparison is very easy. The comparison is with Hülkenberg with the Sauber. The Sauber was not competitive, come qualifying, and Hülkenberg is P11, only slightly slower than the Aston Martin of Alonso. And then what happened in the race? That Sauber was absolutely nowhere. You see the comparison with Williams. They got disqualified. They had to start lower down. They got a race setup, and they were mighty fast. I think that's the key to read the race. It's not Aston Martin screwed up the setup. Aston Martin had to switch to a race setup, and that paid off massively in the race, just like it did for Williams. And a team that did the opposite, focused on qualifying, like Sauber, got absolutely screwed over in the race. I think it's that easy to read the race. I think the Aston Martin was actually mighty fast and was mighty fast on weekend. They just had a race setup.
It was just a kind of chaotic race for them in general,
Yes.
because Alonso, I mean, he got redemption with the penalty because he had that 9-second pit stop that obviously that really kind of screwed things up for him. And then Stroll was doing, I don't even know what was going on there, because he started like at the back, ran extremely long, created a DRS train that was kind of helping Alonso but sort of holding him up as well. He pitted and came out in last, but then gained like 7 places after that, and we saw absolutely none of this because we spent the whole race looking at McLaren. So it was just kind of a very strange one, really.
Yes, to start to explain all these races in the midfield, you kind of have to break out of the team by team dynamic of explaining the race. What happened is Alonso got massively screwed over, okay? So the team kind of kept Stroll out, because Stroll, being on such a worn out soft tire, was very slow. But somehow, I don't know why, Berman was unable to make the overtakes. Berman overtook Albon, and then got stuck behind Sainz, unable to overtake. Even after Stroll will pit on lap 39, Berman still is stuck behind Sainz the entire race until Sainz pits on lap 50. And Berman himself has perfectly fine race pace. When Hajar pitted and Berman had a few laps in free air, he had the same pace as Alonso. And Alonso had a pace that was only half a second slower than the front runners Ferrari. And at the end of the race, when Sainz pitted and lost on 2, and so he had free air, again, he had the same pace as Alonso. So it wasn't really that the car was slow. I guess it was having medium versus mediums and hard versus hards. It's hard to make the overtakes on these tires. And that is the crucial difference with Alonso. He did the comeback with medium tires. And as I said before with the Leclerc-Hamilton section, all this was enabled by the fact there were very slow cars in front holding up the field. If Berman was in free air right from the start, Alonso would not have been able to catch up to him in time, and instead, Berman was held up, and Alonso had all the time in the world to set up the overtakes and make them, and he could because he had the medium tire, and uh, I guess Stroll actually on the strategy got kind of screwed over because he started on the soft, extended very long, and he would have massively benefited from going on the soft again at the end. He would have made all the overtakes possible. Instead, it was on the medium tire, and medium versus medium tires didn't kind of work out. He got stuck behind a few too many cars, and then was gobbled up by Sainz. So it just didn't work out. He It's gonna be the story also for Sainz, for Ajar, this bottling up of the cars who didn't pit, which I'm gonna say right away. The cars who didn't pit were Lawson, Sainz, Stroll, Albon. And so I will explain further when it's their turn.
But yeah, Alonso driver of the day over Russell. I guess people enjoyed his overtakes in a race that usually doesn't have a lot of them. Obviously, there was a tire advantage over Hadjar, Behrman, Sainz, Lawson. But yeah, he still made the mistake. He had really funny radios yesterday. He called Hadjar the hero of the race for, I think, defending way too much when his car was gone, which was a bit, well, you're not just going to let cars through if you have an issue, but Alonso was being Alonso. And then obviously he threatened to cut the radio off if his engineer would keep talking after the bad pit stop. So yeah, we got some classic Alonso yesterday, which is bad luck, road rage, and in the end, a good points tally. I think that's been the story of Alonso's career. As Ace shows a trophy for some reason, maybe it's for driver of the day.
The trophy for the hero of the race goes to Ajar.
There you go. Exactly. The hero of the race who was defending way too much, according to Alonso. But yeah, it was a good race for him. He's back into 11th in the standings. He's back ahead of Stroll, which is quite important because yeah, if Stroll finishes ahead of Alonso for whatever reason it is, it would be one of the most ludicrous teammate results. I thought that was you about to say something, but yeah, P9 went to Behrman and yeah, lost in the standings somehow, but P9 yesterday and a good race for Haas.
Well, last of the full-time drivers, because obviously Colapinto and Doohan both have no points, but yeah, there's no Nedzo here today to wax lyrical about Bear Boy, but I mean that was again because we saw absolutely none of this on the cameras. It's like he made Q3 when Ocon went out in Q1, and he finished 9th and Ocon was 18th. Like that's quite a significant trouncing to have done, and it just went. It just went really unnoticed the whole race because of that garbage TV direction.
So to explain a bit the Haas weekend, because clearly Berman and Ocon had massively different weekends. What happened was Ocon caught the yellow flags in the last section of Q1. And so it was a bit of a mess, those yellow flags, because some drivers slowed down too much, like Portoletto, he saw the yellow flags, slowed down very much and decided, I'm never gonna recover this lap. And then there were other drivers who saw the yellow flags, slowed down just enough, and then tried to kept going and complete the lap. That's the case for Hülkenberg and Albon. And Ocon was one of the drivers, got the yellow flags, couldn't improve the lap time. He was out. It's not really his own fault. And from P17, yeah, I think he started P17. And then he gained one position on Tsunoda. And he was among the cars, after everyone pitted. He was in the group of Lawson, Sainz, Stroll, Ocon, Albon. And then Haas had the very stupid idea of pitting Ocon on lap 31 for our tires. So what happened to poor Ocon is he extended very much, so exit last, and then on the hard tires he still has to do 41 laps. He did not make up any ground, you know. The right call would have been to extend until lap 45, 48, and then put the soft tire, and he would have done the same kind of race that Lawson Sainz did. You know, he would have had a shot for P10. He was on the wrong strategy. You know, the team wasn't foreseeing enough, and they didn't nail the correct choice, pitted him too early. And so Ocon was stuck, you know, struggling to overtake Gasly, struggling to overtake Bortoleto, struggling to overtake Colapinto. I don't even know, where did he finish? He finished P18, yes. He got stuck behind Colapinto and Bortoleto. You know, that was the race of Ocon. Unlucky in qualifying and then the wrong strategy in the race. Berman instead was very strong because I think everybody found it unexpected to see an Haas in Q3. You know, that was another one of those Berman laps that come out of nowhere for no apparent reason, like it was at Silverstone, except this time he didn't get a stupid penalty. And you know, he was ninth, so on the clean side of the grid, got a good start, but then tangled up with Hajar, you know, and that kind of screwed him over. Was still gonna finish P8 because then Hajar had a problem and Alonso got a slow pit stop. But crucially, as I already said, he got stuck behind Sainz, unable to overtake him. And that was the entire race because until lap 50, he could not unleash his own pace. And by then, he was overtaken back by Alonso. And so that's only a P9, but you know, still a very strong race by Berman. The point is we are up against the kind of races that Russell, Verstappen, Alonso, Sainz, Colapinto did, and you know, that doesn't really shine through. A very strong race.
Yeah, while with this discrepancy between Berman and Ocon's performances this year, it's really been standing out to me because Ocon was meant to provide much more of a challenge, and sometimes these weekends just happen where Berman is in Q3 and Ocon is out in Q1, but also he's out in Q1 in like 18th or 19th a lot. And Ocon is not a bad qualifier by any standard. So either Berman is the next Leclerc of Saturdays, or Ocon just really cannot get to grips with that car. But it's just a weird one. Anyway, P10 was Sainz, I think. That means Williams. What did you make of the DSQ and the eventual point?
I mean, I don't know how much difference it made in the end, the DSQ, because it's like looking at the end results. If they had, because it was P12 and P13, they might have finished 10th and 11th. That's a bit better, I suppose. But either way, Sainz went from 18th to 10th. Albon had a bit more of a quieter race, but again, we didn't really see any of it. But again, it's not one of their stronger circuits because they're sort of getting into a rhythm, or Sainz is at least off of that podium at the last race. But it's still just a lot of getting lost in the midfield.
The disqualification was less than optimal. It almost completely ruined the race, and I guess Williams really just threw the dice with the strategy because I don't think they ever expected to extend up to lap 50 with Sainz. But you know, they had nothing to lose because they lost everything with the stupid disqualification. And you know, they were paid off handsomely well with a point stolen from the Racing Pool, which is their closest rival in the Constructor Championship. So Williams really is looking for a P5 at the end of the year, and that's mighty impressive. As for the race, I like to compare Sainz and Albon because I don't think anybody understands that Sainz was the better driver, clearly better, but Albon got screwed over also. So, as I said, Albon started from the pit lane, Sainz was the last P18 on the grid, and they made up no positions at the start. They both started on the medium tires, and they just kept extending, hoping for a safety car. Finally, they decided that they couldn't extend anymore because basically all the rivals had pitted and they were right behind their cars. So what was going to happen? And so first they pitted Albon on lap 43. They pitted Albon on lap 43 for soft tire, and that was a very, very, very stupid decision because Albon exited right behind Piastri. That is mighty fun because Albon was not able to unlap himself from Piastri, so he couldn't go as fast as possible with the new soft tires. So he was stuck there. And that meant everything in the race because when Albon got pitted, instead somehow Sainz, Lawson, Stroll, they started to find good rhythm, but very good rhythm. And so when they pitted 5, 6, 7 laps later, they actually exited in front of Albon. So Albon got mightily kicked over because he did not do any undercut, and then he did not have tires good enough to catch all the way up to P10. But even then, Sainz was the faster driver, so Albon didn't deserve to score points anyway. Instead, Sainz, really nailed the strategy. He extended to lap 50, was the last driver to pit, and he was mighty fast on those very old worn medium tires, which meant he exited ahead of Colapinto, Bortoleto, Ocon, Gasly, Hülkenberg quartet of cars, and then he made the overtake on Stroll immediately. Then overtook the next car was Tsunoda. Then overtook Hajar. Then overtook no, Hajar was the last one. It was mighty fast because he cut away lots of drivers. He overcut Lawson. Okay, he did the overcut on Lawson. That is mighty impressive.
Yeah, not much to add on Williams after that. Just a weekend where Sainz did get the point and Albon didn't, and it's starting to become a thing there at Williams, so Sainz might be turning the tides there. What would be the next team? Not even sure.
Racing Bulls.
Yes, Racing Rules with Hadjar and Lawson. Hadjar had a disrupted race because of his issues.
Somehow still finished 11th, and as I said earlier on in the podcast, still beats Tsunoda even with those issues, because there were points when he was losing so much time and letting people out of the way that I thought he was going to retire the car. But otherwise had very strong race. Lawson, he crashed in practice, didn't he, I think, and we saw just twice, and then again we saw, I don't think he did much, but we saw very little of him because he just got lost in the midfield in the race as well. But this is Hajar is really starting to get into a rhythm. It's just a shame that his career is going to be destroyed next year when he moves to Red Bull.
Yes, Hajar got really the short end of the stick. He did, he was on the dirty side of the grid, the left side. And so him and Alonso and Verstappen had the mighty idea to compensate the dirty side of the grid by starting on the soft tire. And it kind of worked out. He tangled up with Berman, but was running P9 after being overtaken by Alonso. And he was doing a very fine race, fast. And then on lap 21, he gets an engine issue. And the team immediately pits him for new medium tires to try maybe solve those few seconds stopped on the pit box, the issue with the engine, but I guess it was useless. And then, that was kind of race over because those few seconds meant he lost on the pit box, meant Berman overcut him, and then he was underpowered, so he had a hard time defending. And finally, or overtaking, he couldn't overtake Albon, who had yet to stop, and couldn't defend well from Alonso. He was so reckless, I found, with Alonso being on the outside, almost completely ahead, and then come the braking zone, and Hadjar just brake as late as possible to try stay ahead. He did that 4 or 5 times, and then he got so much compromised that he got out traction out of turn 3. How many overtakes have been done out of turn 3 by sheer traction? Very, 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 very few. He actually got overtaken right there by Sainz at the end of the race. But Sainz was on a Williams with new soft tires when Hadjar was on 30 laps old hard tires. That is understandable. So anyway, reckless, yes, but crucially, he never went off the tracks when he braked so late. Reckless, but he never made a mistake, and that is impressive. But that is not what I found impressive about the race. It was not the way he just struggled so much for a single point. The mighty thing I found was he was fighting with Tsunoda, and Tsunoda got very, very close. He was gonna make the overtake any moment. And then he got a lucky break because they were getting caught up by Verstappen, Norris, Piastri. And so Hadjar played it incredibly smart because if anybody noticed, they got the blue flags, and so Tsunoda fell back behind Verstappen, Norris, and then also Piastri. Hadjar instead, you know what he did? He started to push massively on the tires, even though he didn't have an engine. And so he kept 1, 2, 3 laps by not giving blue flags to Norris and Verstappen, and he was fast enough to actually not get the blue flags. And so for those few laps, he did not have Tsunoda behind breathing down on his neck. And he could push, he could delay this moment he was going to be back with Tsunoda. And that was crucial because at the end, those few laps Hadjar was able to buy meant Tsunoda did not have enough laps to actually pull off the overtake at the end. That is why Tsunoda did not make the overtake. It was because Hadjar was just so smart with the way he raced. I found this idea of using the blue flags, of just unleashing a mighty pace out of the tires alone. It reminded me of what Alonso was doing in Canada 2022. He gets called the little Prost, and I saw it today. I God damn it saw it today. I think he was one of the driver of the race just because of the way when things went to shit. He was smart enough, reckless enough to race and still not make a mistake. I know Hadjar gets lots of compliments for what he achieved during this year. I think this is yet another race he has to get the full credit of. As good as any other of the best races he has had this year. Oh, I guess I forgot about Lawson in all this. Yeah, Lawson was one of the guys that extended very, very long. He pitted on lap 48 for new soft tires, but crucially, Lawson exited behind Albon, and Albon himself was behind the Colapinto, Portoletto, Gasly, Hülkenberg, Ocon fight. So too many cars to overtake, and at the end it was only P13.
I mean, there was a bit of discussion.
I feel like the crash affected him, but yeah.
There was a bit of discussion during the race about blue flags and if they were going to get Hadjar to try and play any games, because we've seen this before that they try and help the A team out when they can. When Lando and Max came up to him, but I guess he decided,
especially with the message.
With the message. And I was thinking,
that was very weird. It's like, what do you mean? You know what to do like that?
Yeah, because also they were so close together. There's no possible way he could have got out of the way of Max and then filtered in between them. And then, because then he would have just been accused of illegal blocking. So I don't really see, because we never saw. We've seen stuff in the past where it's not so much that they try and block other teams. It's more that they make no effort at all to block Red Bull when they come up to them. But we've never seen anything as extreme as like Checo in Abu Dhabi 21, for example. But he could have theoretically done that. But yeah, that was a bit of drama.
We only have Sauber left? Oh no, Alpine as well. Both
Alpine,
of them
two of them.
Mm.
Yeah.
Honestly, I have nothing to say on either of those teams, so I'll give you the floor, both of you.
I mean, the same Alpine have done. I mean, they didn't do anything. They haven't done anything in a long time because they really, at the beginning of the season, they were there or thereabouts, but they're not even really competitive with the midfield anymore. They're just perpetually in Q1, always at the back. There's not like every other team has a legitimate chance of scoring points, and Alpine just don't have that at the moment. So they're just not. They're just not doing anything interesting. And for Kick Sauber, it was just disappointing because they've had that run mid-season where they were getting points and a podium and things were going well. And this time, they're both out. Well, they're both out Q2. I mean, Hulkenberg, that was his best qualifying of the year because he still hasn't made Q3 yet all season, which is quite remarkable. And he got 11th, but then his race went to shit when he had that big spin. Almost got the car stuck, so that nearly gave us a safety car. So he ended up last, and then yeah, Bortoletto was just not there. So yeah, just one of their more anonymous races.
Bortoletto had the wing damage at the start, so he had to pit fairly early, and then he was fighting with the Renault, the Alpine, unable to make overtakes, and that was the race. Stuck behind Colapinto. Hulkenberg, he had a better race. He was P11, in the first stint, but then, as I said, I don't think the Sauber had a race setup because they pitted Hulkenberg on lap. What does it say here? Hulkenberg, lap 26. So same lap as Russell and Antonelli. He exited behind the drivers who had yet to pit, and then made the mistake. He was not gonna get into the points anyway. The Sauber was not good enough, and lucky to not crash into the barriers. I think a bit more story about Alpine, because clearly Alpine was the worst car this weekend and has been the worst car in the last 5 races. So it's not unexpected. Gasly had the issue in Q1 and then started from the pit lane, and then, what could they have done? I think Colapinto deserves to be mentioned because Colapinto did a mighty race and nobody will ever know it because he had the worst car. He started on the soft tire. He was running P13 on the first stint and then was among the first guys to pit. He pitted on lap 15. From soft tires, he went on the medium tire and he pitted to cover up Tsunoda and Bortoleto, who had pitted the lap prior. And then he did the entire rest of the race, from lap 15 to the end, on the medium tires, trying to make an undercut work. And actually, the car was so bad, the undercut did not work. He was still slower than the guys who had yet to pit in front of him. And so, anyway, what he accomplished, he still managed to beat both Bortoleto and Hulkenberg, and by resisting 47 laps on the medium tires, and he did a normal qualifying session where he didn't screw anything up. This is the first very good race I see from Colapinto since he came back with Alpine, and it was for P16. I think it's just, I listened to his post race interview. He was just so demoralized, you could hear it in his voice that he was just helpless, hopeless, and I saw the race he did. I saw the very good race he pulled off for just a mere P16. I think it's a shame that he only pulled off such a good race now that the Alpine is hopeless and not early in the season.
And in the meantime, Gasly is starting to get beaten by Colapinto as well.
Yes.
Which is something. It's a shame it kind of goes under the radar because it's not because they're not fighting for points or whatever. But as I've said a million times, Gasly has been supreme since 2020, really. So that should be food for thought because there is endless discussions about their lineup next year. I mean, Gasly will stay, but like, there's been. I think they've said Jack Doohan is still a contender. How that is the case, I don't know because he hasn't raced in the car in ages, unless he's really impressing them still with simulator work and all of that stuff. It's like you haven't given him any opportunities to sort of redeem himself, even if it's just doing an FB1 session or whatever. Instead, Paul hasn't done Paul Aaron's done one for them, but he's been mostly doing his ones for Sauber because again he's also a contender as well. So they that one will be interesting to see where they go. But it's just like at the moment this is quite a severe downturn in performance in general, and also we're still not like next year because it is Mercedes next year. They've got engines. That is done deal, isn't it? Yeah. So presumably, why are they going to still be called Alpine? Because they're going to have absolutely no connection to Alpine anymore. So even for like licensing reasons, they probably wouldn't be allowed to still call them. So they'll need to think up a new name.
Do you feel like Colapinto will get a point before the end of the season?
No.
Because they're not bringing upgrades. So.
Only if we had a chaotic race or something where and he just scrapes P10, or does what Logan
I feel like
Sargent
even
did.
then the car isn't fast enough.
Yeah, that
You
was
need
my
like
point.
8
Is that
DNFs.
the other midfield teams they can get points, but Alpine it just doesn't. Yeah, it would need to be a really really chaotic race, which we're probably not going to have because again we've got the highest finishing rate of any season so far this year. We're averaging about 90%. So it's not like we're going to have a race anytime soon with like 12 finishes. I mean, hasn't there been one that had a lot of DNFs this year already? And I'm forgetting which one it was, unless it was like Silverstone or we've seen a whole bunch of guys go.
I think it was Austria.
Austria had 16 finishes, so that's not too bad. Silverstone had 15, so I think it is Silverstone I'm thinking of. Actually, Australia had 14 finishes, but yeah, so those are pretty. Yeah, for any other season, those are pretty typical numbers, but those are obviously really low for this one, where it's mostly like we're lucky to have one retirement per race. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that finger circles because we have looked at all the teams. But who are your top 3 drivers? Because this race is very hard to single out 3 drivers with all of the good performances. Ace, who did you think?
I could go for the obvious ones, Russell, Verstappen, Alonso, Sainz, any of these. But I don't think either of you is gonna say Colapinto, and I really like this race, and I like the Hajar's race just as much. So I'm gonna say, because I'm sure either one of you will say Alonso, I won't say it, and I actually will say Colapinto, Hajar, Russell.
Peter?
Well, I'm going the obvious ones, which is George, Max, and Nando.
Yeah, Alonso, Russell. Yeah, well, you can't really put someone other than Max, I guess. Let's give it to Lando. He did something. He wasn't better than Max. I'm just giving him I'm giving him some credit in this season when he usually doesn't deserve any.
In terms of flops as well, because we have to do them. I guess McLaren. God, I don't know.
McLaren,
Hulkenberg, who went off.
is bad.
Sorry?
Hulkenberg, who went off.
Yeah. I was going to say McLaren, Tsunoda, and the TV director.
Then I'm gonna say Hulkenberg, who went off. Lawson, who crashed the car twice in free practice and achieved nothing in the race. And then I'm gonna say Piastri, because it was a very disappointing race, being so clearly slower than Norris.
I'll say Alpine, the TV director, and honestly Zach Brown for being so annoying every single time his team does well. Like, yeah, he's just a bit jarring at this point.
It feels weird to name McLaren as a flop at a race where they won the Constructors' Championship, but yeah, that's just the way it is now. But yeah, so yeah, not the best race, but all the remaining tracks are good ones. The title fight is getting interesting. If Max can keep this up, it will keep things very interesting towards the end. Austin in 2 weeks, that's always good fun. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, definitely Austin should be decent. Who do you think is gonna have a good performance there with the track details and
Max is good
specificity.
there. Max has a bunch of wins. Was it 20 last year? Somehow Ferrari won out of nowhere, but yeah. I mean, my only major concern in terms of remaining circuits for Max was Singapore because it's a weak one, but he's strong everywhere else, so I think he'll do well at Kota.
Yeah, hopefully he can make up some points on
Yeah,
McLaren.
we'll just have to see what happens. You've been listening to the DRS Train podcast. You can find us on YouTube and Spotify at the DRS Train podcast. If you become a channel member, you can get early access to videos as well as some behind-the-scenes footage, and you can join our current members, Birak Choshkun, Chris Odea, and Blue Guy. Make sure to tune in for our next episode. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next time.